자, 지금부터는 저희 인터넷으로 실시간으로 참여하고 계시는 참여자들의 질문을 발표해 주신 네 분 선생님께 전달해 드리도록 하겠습니다. 첫 번째 질문은 치디 오구아남 교수님께 드리는 질문입니다. 실제 오구아남 교수님께서 캐나다 원주민들의 사례를 많이 말씀을 해주셨는데요. 실제 토착민들이 과거에 실질적으로 겪었던 환경 위기가 있었는지, 그리고 그 과정에서 어떤 식으로 극복했는지 그런 사례를 조금 더 소개해 주시면 좋겠다라는 질문이 들어와 있습니다. 오구아남 교수님께서 질문에 대한 답을 생각하시는 동안 한 두 질문이 더 있는데요. 하나만 더 드리면 오구아남 교수님께 드린 질문이 언어와 구연 전통, 구술 전통이 생태계의 생물 다양성 부분에 관련해서 여러 가지 실질적인 해결 방안을 내놓은 게 있었는지, 아직 없다면 언어 다양성과 환경이 서로 어떻게 밀접하게 연결되어 있는지를 조금 더 설명해 주셨으면 좋겠다는 질문이 있습니다. 오구아남 교수님.
Linguistic diversity and the environment. So I'll give you some time to think about it, and I have other questions to relate to other speakers. Dr. Raul?
So in India, you've talked about how different communities were able to overcome natural disasters. Today, I think that individuals because we're living in a capitalist-oriented society, we're all working for our own gain. We're all working for our own interests. So can that collective spirit and capitalism coexist? Because I'm wondering if the ICH values, which are based on coexistence and solidarity, can that really coexist with capitalism, which is all about individual interests? And there's also another additional question to you, Dr. Goswami. You talked about the Himalayan region and the process of overcoming disaster. And you talked about certain education programs and training programs to the community members. And I think you mentioned something about festivals to try to raise awareness among the villagers. What was exactly part in those festivals?
And to Dr. Kumikato, in ICH, spiritual issues, religious issues or matters are very much embedded in this practice. And in this modern world that we live in, such religious issues, for example, the spiritual religious issues that the ICH contain, how would they be able to function? What are the roles that we can expect from these in the modern world? If I could get your view on that, I would appreciate that. And the second question for you, Dr. Kato, is that you've given us an example of the traditional fishing practice of women divers in Japan, but due to environmental changes, those, for example, the abalones and seafoods that were harvested by women divers are actually disappearing in Korea. So what's the current status in Japan? I mean, you have prayers for harvest, but then they don't want to over-harvest. So you're saying that this traditional knowledge system is in place, but in terms of harvesting these seafood from the sea by the women drivers, are they, for example, are they enough abundant seafoods available in the sea, or is it disappearing? So I gave these two questions to each of the speakers. So I would like to ask the speakers to have time to think about your answers. So Dr. Chidi Oguanam, could I get your answers for the two questions that were posed to you?
So I'm sorry, there was no translation that followed the question directed to me, so I wouldn't figure out what questions it was. So if it can be translated again, I didn't get a translation the first instance.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will do that right now. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
This is the interpreter speaking. Okay, so the first question was about the environmental changes and crises that the indigenous people in Canada have had to go through. So what were some of the environmental crises that these people have experienced in the past, and how were they able to overcome them? Second question is related to the language and oral traditions and its role in terms of addressing ecological and biological problems. Can you clarify the connection between the linguistic diversity and the environment?
Okay, so the first question has to do with the environmental crisis that indigenous peoples underwent. Let us start by saying that an environmental crisis, essentially, I don't want to talk about in the level of crisis. Before there was climate change, before we ran into this horrible ditch globally, the environment had a pattern of change, and it was a dynamic, just like the keynote speaker was saying, when the percentage of human beings on Earth were still within the Earth's carrying capacity. So indigenous peoples, like any other civilization, were living within a significant degree of harmony. But until colonialism and the whole ideology of conquer and dominate the environment came to being, their ways of life were completely changed. And hunting and gathering, existing in harmony with natural forces and the ecosystem, were completely disrupted by industries and the opening up of many spaces. So, seriously speaking, before colonialism, there was no significant and unusual environmental crisis among indigenous peoples. The whole crisis started with a new ideology of the environment, which is to dominate and to conquer, which is inconsistent with the ways of life of indigenous peoples. And in the contemporary times, as most of us know, through climate change, the snow is melting, their ways of life are being truncated, and seriously, there's a lot, even as people are lamenting climate change, some other people are celebrating that there are going to be passages, that economic activities will be enhanced. So the whole climate change and climate deniers, they both coexist in the Canadian environment, but the indigenous peoples are receiving the greatest shock of their whole life more than any other social group in Canada. And the next question is linguistic diversity and ecological diversity. One point is clear, even from anthropology, that diversity is the most significant source of sustainability and resilience. And so when you have a population that is just 5% of Canada, which is a country of about 35 million people, but they have the highest concentration of linguistic diversity. What does that say? It talks about resilience, and diversity goes with insight into ecological diversity, species diversity. And when you look at the global South in relation to the Western world, you still see that areas of diversity are consistent with areas of biological diversity. So linguistic diversity corresponds with ecological diversity, and it comes with incredible amount of knowledge in terms of ecological discipline and stewardship. So it is quite consistent. Wherever you see pluralism in language, in culture, in ways of life, you also see resilience for ecological discipline and a worldview that is not just monolithic, as we have seen with the Western world, which has actually driven us into this crisis more than any other influence.
네, 감사합니다. 그러면 두 번째 우리 라홀 고스와미 선생님께서
Next,
답변해
we
주세요.
would like to hear from Dr. Rahul Goswami.
라홀 고스와미 선생님 오디오가 지금 안 들리는데요.
Dr. Goswami, I think you're muted.
I'm so sorry I was not able to understand your question. If somebody could make a summary of it in English and just put it on the chat, then I will happily answer.
통역하시는 선생님께서 혹시 채팅방에
I think that if can somebody put up the question on the chat?
네, 알겠습니다. 그러면
Okay.
진행 측에서
So I believe that the organizers would be able to upload that question to you by text. And while we wait, we would like to ask Professor Kumi Kato for her response to the question.
Thank you for the questions. And then I think I got two very difficult questions. I don't really have the right answer, I don't think. But the first question, what do we do with religions? And then the second question was, what do we do with this traditional knowledge when actually the sea itself is depleting? I believe that's I think that's the two questions. And then I think really, I don't really have exact, I wish I had a sort of exact answer, but then I don't. But at the same time, we work with the policy, and I work in a tourism area. But so now sustainability is becoming very much part of that policies and political discourse very much. So in policy areas that we now we sort of use universal standards, but then at the same time, okay, when we implement those universal standards of the sustainability, such as SDGs, then we really need to think about what is the right local right way of implementing this. And then obviously when you actually think about that, we really need to be aligned with the local culture, local tradition, local protocol, which actually the religion is very much part of. So I'm actually quite hopeful that that sort of reviving of the local knowledge is coming. And in terms of sort of global movement, because we are trying to implement like standards in many areas. At the same time, because of the corona, that we very much now our attention is given to rural, local areas, that we are very much now becoming more interested in our local areas rather than, because we can't go overseas. So I think there is also a sort of revival of the local interests. So I'm hoping that will actually help to actually pay more attention and give value to the local knowledge, and which actually religion is very much part of. And the second question, the sea itself is depleting, which is, it's a global phenomenon. It's very much true. And like Japan, it's very guilty of eating all the fish, particularly like tuna and eels that are one of the very sort of endangered species. So again, there's a policy is very important. So we have like sustainable seafood, ethical seafood, like marine stewardship. So I guess we do need a very, in a way, policy, in some way sort of top-down approach as well. Although, we are very much looking at the grassroots ideas and knowledge and power in the community, but then at the same time, we do need a very strong leadership as well, which, sorry, I'm not really answering the question, but that's my part. Thank you.
네, 질문 답변 감사드리고요.
Thank you very much for your response to that. I believe that Dr. Rahul Goswami might be ready. If you are ready, or while we wait just a little bit, we do have some questions to Sinikinesh Jimma, our last presenter. So I'm going to ask you the question and then head over to Dr. Rahul for his response. So in terms of resource use, what if there are differing opinions within the community on how best to use the resources? So maybe somebody might say, yes, it's important to protect the environment, but we also need to make a living. So we need to make some economic use of the resources. And if there is this conflict within the community, people have different opinions about environmental protection, how would you resolve those conflicts when there is this different ideas on environmental protection and resource use? Is there like a process on how you reach agreement? Can you elaborate on that, please? So while we wait on that, Dr. Rahul Goswami, if you have received the question, we'd like to hear your response.
Thank you for asking this. Can you hear me all right? Yes. Thank you for asking this question. How does ICH and capitalism coexist? Can they coexist, and should they? Um, are they relevant to each other in any way? That's a particularly difficult question. I think intuitively we should be saying that no, they cannot and should not. But I would say that capitalism in the form that we have seen, which has contributed to the destruction of biodiversity, to the destruction of ecological systems, that of course is completely incompatible with ICH and its safeguarding. However, the use of goods and services, the trading in goods and services, the understanding of the methods, the economic methods with which communities communicate with each other and assign value to each other's goods and ideas and knowledge, this is indeed economically important. It is also the medium of exchange of knowledge and the way in which ideas have traveled for centuries. So if we were to enlarge the current rather narrow view of capitalism and call it, in a way, economic communitarianism, or an economic community that is beneficial because it respects knowledge systems and it especially respects the ecosphere and the biosphere within which these knowledge systems survive and thrive, then yes, of course, that is to be welcomed. And I think the crux of the answer is that as long as it is small and sustainable, which means it doesn't grab and extract more than what is due to it for this generation, and there's enough for the next to survive on and thrive on, then of course they can and should coexist. But I think a lot of the answer has to do with how we frame what capitalism is in the first place. If we frame it as, yes, we can, as two different communities, we can arrive at valuing each other's knowledge, at valuing each other's products of knowledge, and exchange them in a way that doesn't devalue one and turn one into an economic serf, then of course I would say there is complementarity, there is need for this economic system, and I see it safeguarding. Thank you.
네. 자, 그럼
Yes,
신익
thank you very much. To Ms. Sinikinesh, Jima, would you like to respond to the questions?
I'm sorry, I couldn't get my question in English. Can someone help me to? First of all, I would like to say to apologize for not sharing my good presentation. But the question, I didn't get it. Can someone help me?
예,
get the
통역
question.
전달이 안 된 모양입니다. 질문을 한 번 더 통역해 주시면
Yes, can
감사하겠습니다.
somebody provide that question to Ms. Jima?
제가 질문을 한 번 더 하겠습니다.
Okay, so why don't I repeat the question? The question was, within a community, there might be different opinions regarding environmental protection. So there might be some people who want to pursue just environmental protection, whereas there might be some people who might say that we should go more towards economic benefits. So if there is this conflict of interest, if there are different opinions within a community.
Is someone is translating this for me?
So I think there might be some technical difficulties.
So, can you listen to me?
I can hear you very well.
All right, and I'll
Yeah.
ask you. The question is, in the community, there would be two different opinions. One
Yes.
side, they want to reserve the ecosystem, but the other groups,
Yes.
they want to develop their own community. So when
Yes.
you have these two different opinions, how do they discuss and then reach to agreement on keeping the ecosystems?
Thank you so much, Chair, for helping to understand the question. That is very obvious and important question. As we learn, especially in Africa, I am African, The community has a big tradition, custom, belief in nature, and they respect the land because it's given for the human being to live in. However, the current modernization, as it was mentioned, the colonial capitalism, all that is destroying, and the cultural practices are now considered as backward tradition. So as I mentioned, most of the cultures, most of the practices have been destroyed or abandoned because of this, the current move for modernization and doing in a modern one. But what we have learned from practice, I'm a practitioner, and the researcher are already mentioned how important the cultural intangible heritage to coexist for human beings and the nature together. If we would like to sustain our existence on the earth, we need to respect the nature. So that is now, the research is helping us as a practitioner. We development partners are bringing that knowledge that the cultures, the beliefs, and the intangible cultural heritage must be conserved, must be transferred to the next generation through education system, through different awareness raising system. I'm sorry you didn't see my screen, but one of the things we are doing in Timor-Leste is bringing the youth, I can share that photo if it's really helpful, is bringing the youth to come and see when the elders are sitting in the cultural places, in the ocean, and under the tree to do the rituals. So there is a disaster of development, modern thinking, but now we're learning back because of COVID. Even now, we have learned a lot that destroying nature will be destroy us. So as a continuous learning, experience sharing, and documenting through curriculum, and also by acknowledging and supporting the system through technology. As I mentioned, one of the slides was, there is a community traditional ecosystem conservation activity. We supported them through modern practices. They are not bad. You can support community activities, traditions by science. So we're bringing science and evidences to the local practices. So in harmony, we can build a community and ecosystem resilience, if I stop there. But if it is possible, I can show that photo on a slide, that how we are supporting community traditional practice by technology and modernization. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다. 자, 우리가 약속한 시간보다 벌써
Thank you very much. Actually, we are behind our schedule. We're behind by 10 minutes, so I don't think I could use that time to ask questions again. I'm just going to ask you a very simple question to our 4 speakers. So of all the presentations that you've heard, what's the one key takeaway or key message that you want to deliver to the audience? If you could just make that into a one sentence, just key or core message or key one takeaway, if you could do that for the audience, please. We're going to first start with Dr. Oguanam. Dr. Oguanam.
Thank you. So the key message is to take another look at indigenous linguistic diversity as a pathway to handling the global ecological crisis.
네, 두 번째로는 우리 라홀 고스와미 선생님께서
Dr. Rahul Goswami, would you like to comment? In one sentence, what's your takeaway?
Thank you. Important key message is that all our work on ICH and traditional knowledge systems should be really seen according to the rhythm of the particular community whose well-being and whose benefit for which we are working. That rhythm, as I mentioned in my presentation, is not necessarily an annual rhythm. It is usually 4 to 5 years. Sometimes it even extends to half a generation. This is a difference in the understanding of time and periods of time, which especially we need to be more cognizant of when we are approaching ICH safeguarding. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다. 다음엔 쿠미가토.
Dr. Kumikato,
Hi.
your key message, please.
One sentence. Well, unity with each other and with our land and seas, and respect diverse ways of knowing.
네, 아주 강력한 말씀이셨습니다. 자,
That was a
마지막
very strong message. Next, we'd like to lastly hear from Sinekinesh Jima.
Thank you so much. My last word is we need to harmonize our practices through evidence-based governance system that promote respect and sustain the traditional cultural practices that help us to coexist with nature and environment. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다. 오늘
Thank you very much. So through our presentations, we were able to understand what humanity should do in the face of this global pandemic crisis. Taking use of the indigenous knowledge system as part of the ICH, and we were able to hear from our four speakers various case examples. So thank you very much for your wonderful presentations, as well as our online participants for your active participation in the event. So this concludes the session 2 on humanity's response to the crisis and ICH. Thank you very much for your hard work. Thank you.